The Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Well, everybody, welcome to the SpotTrack.com podcast, post-Super Bowl edition, but NFL offseason edition and a special edition. I'm Kevin Sylvester, along with Paul Peck. We're from BuffaloSportsPage.com, founder of SpotTrack.com, Mike Giannetti. And Mike, I'll let you introduce our special in-studio guest.
Yeah, we're kicking off this NFL offseason with an appropriate guest, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Active NFL agent from Pillar Sports and Management, Shane Costa.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm excited that his undergraduate was at my alma mater, Fredonia.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, local guy.
Look how successful he's become despite all of that.
No, I'm going to talk to him. Well, wait, no. I wasn't going to say that. Yeah, it was a shot. Well, listen, we didn't pay to have Syracuse on our diploma. Okay,
exactly.
So actually, we've accomplished more.
Blah 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 blah.
By the way, that big Pillar football school in Fredonia, right?
And we had a tremendous intramural league.
Listen, our intramural football team was pretty good. We could have taken on anybody anywhere in the country. I stand by that.
That's where it stops, though.
Just don't challenge me right now because I probably have to ice my arm for about 4 weeks.
He does make a good point. The intramural field, which I always get that word wrong. It's intramural. Yeah, intramural. The intramural games were wars, right?
Oh my gosh.
I mean, they were. It was incredible. That's where, I mean, if you didn't come out of there bloody and bruised, you didn't play right. They were tougher than the rugby games at Fredonia.
Oh, for sure.
Yes.
And now I'm going to get a lot of hate for
That's all right.
It's actually probably not true.
We can probably edit all this.
No.
Well, as Mike said,
Listen, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story, Shane.
Right.
Yeah, as Mike said, this is your time of the year, Shane. This is the beginning of the NFL offseason, and we're going to talk so much about the dynamics that go into the draft and how guys get ready for the draft and free agency and how guys get paid and contracts. So what a great opportunity it is for us to actually have an agent here to talk all about this. And I guess let's start by the interesting role of an agent is you've got clients who are current NFL players and you're preparing them, I assume, for free agency. And then you've got your next wave of guys, which is the guys that are getting prepared that you've just signed from college for the draft. So how do you juggle both, and what's going on for an agent right now as we do this in early February?
Well, sure. I mean, obviously, the draft prep is well underway. The combine's in 4 weeks or so in Indianapolis, and so everybody's busy getting ready, not just for the combine, but for their pro days, too. Obviously, you also have guys getting ready for free agency. You're prepping guys not only potentially on destinations and other fit scenarios and doing research and player comps and all that stuff, but it's actually threefold, too, because your players that are still under contract that maybe they're just finishing their first year or second year or whatever, you're helping them prepare during the offseason, too. It's really a critical time, especially for second and third year guys. You want them, obviously, they're still on the roster. They've had some amount of success, hopefully a lot of success. And you not only just want to sustain that success, you want to help them keep improving. So, you might be setting them up at places to train in the offseason. You want them to take some time off, especially guys that finished on playoff teams. But you do want to create a plan for them, too, to develop. So it is a little bit threefold. I mean, no matter what position a guy's in, again, whether they're getting ready for the draft or getting ready for free agency, or if they're on a roster, you want to be there helping those guys out, too. And then another interesting angle this year is with the AAF, the Alliance League, that's we've got two clients that
starts
are starting
this weekend.
That league. Yeah, it starts this weekend. We've got two clients on two different teams, Phoenix and Orlando. So that's a little bit interesting this year too. To kind of you feel like you just finished the season, and then you got another season starting up too for a couple of guys. So yeah, there's a few different things going on, a few different angles. It's definitely an interesting time of year, that's for sure.
All right, go ahead, Mike.
Real quick, I'm going to piggyback off that. What are the expectations for those two guys? Is it play this season and then try out for the NFL?
Yeah, I think the big selling point is not only do they get paid, which is great, right? But of course they're putting out film. I've talked to many teams; they all plan on scouting that league and probably fairly heavily, especially at important developmental positions, right? Offensive tackle, you hear about it all the time. Offensive line in general, right? Teams are looking for more development out of those guys. And, coincidentally, we have Andrew Lauderdale, tackle that's with Phoenix. So we view it as a really good opportunity for him to develop, get some film out there. And then that season's going to end in June. Yeah. So it's really a nice time of year when that ends to hopefully get onto a team's roster in time for.
Let me ask you one question about that. And again, it's going to pop up this weekend, and people that are aching to watch football are going to check it out, and they're going to see.
Because they didn't see a game last week.
I know. I looked at a couple of rosters just to see if there were some players that I knew or knew of, and I was a little surprised, Shane, that there were less players on those rosters than I thought that the average fan would know. So what it tells me, and correct me if this is wrong, and this affects how you sort of tell your clients, is it guys that have already sort of cycled out of the NFL, or is it guys that never really got their chance? I mean, what's the makeup?
Practice
is it guys that are maybe out 3-4 years who had a couple training camps, maybe weren't on a roster for a while, but kind of got pushed out as they got older, or is there a chance that these guys have the ability to go back to the league at all?
I think it's a mix of everything. There was a combine last August, I believe, for a lot of guys that were not even on 90-man rosters in NFL training camps at that point to come in, test, show good testing numbers. And I think they did all the combine-type drills that the NFL combine does. And so teams kind of started to take a look at the height, weight, speed athletes that maybe slipped through the cracks or otherwise they thought they could turn into players or at least develop them. And so there's a mixture of some of those types of guys. There's certainly, to my knowledge, I think there's a couple practice squad guys probably per team that they finished the season on the practice squad in the NFL. They had contracts signed back in the fall because of the way the league was structured. You could sign a contract with the AAF team, but if you ended up getting onto an NFL practice squad or team, you still do the same thing and the contract would void. And so you were still under contract to an AAF team, even if you were on a practice squad, and then you could re-sign essentially after the NFL season ended. That's what happened with Andrew Lauderdale. He actually finished up with the Bills, and then about a week later, whenever that signing window opened, he went and joined Phoenix.
Boy, we're going to send the AAF a bill. They're getting more pub on this show than anybody ever.
People are going to watch, though, right?
People
already miss
here's
football.
Here's the question. Yeah. People are only going to watch as long as the football is good quality, and that's been the challenge for any other league that has challenged the NFL through our lifetime, minus the USFL.
The XFL was crap, yeah.
You're going to look and you're going to go, if the quarterbacks aren't good and offensive line, like you talked about, Shane, that's if the lines can't protect quarterbacks to let them make plays and the games are all 10-6 because you don't have enough good offensive players because anybody that can play is in the league, then people aren't going to watch.
Well, no, I agree with that. My question is this: because this shows about money and contracts. What's the money like in that league? Is there a salary cap, and what's the money like for the players? And then my next question is going to be if you guys get an indication of what McMahon's league is going to be in a year from now.
Well, to start with your last question, XFL, they're still kind of putting it together and sorting through it. My understanding, and I could be wrong on this with the XFL, my understanding is that's going to be a little bit more incentive-based. But again, I could be wrong, and I think they're still trying to figure some of that stuff out. I will say this, with both leagues, there's been a lot of agent outreach, a lot of communication with agents, kind of selling the league, getting agents on board, because if we have players not in the NFL, we're always trying to, if they want to continue playing football, we're always trying to get our clients opportunities, find ways for them to, go and show themselves and show that they can still play or show that they've improved.
Do you have to get certified with those other leagues? Do you have to be certified with the NFL? Does that certification transfer over, or do they make you pay a certification fee to negotiate contracts with them too?
The CFL, you do. too. I know that's a whole separate conversation.
Yeah,
We've already brought up a lot of
no,
leagues,
it's just all
but,
interesting stuff. That's what So
yeah, AAF and XFL. I think to my knowledge, there's certainly no certification for AAF. I think it's if you're the agent on record, through the NFLPA logs. I think that's how you get contacted and sort that stuff out. My guess is that in the future there will probably be some type of certification process. I mean, those guys. Obviously they don't have a union,
right.
for those leagues, at least yet anyway, right? So,
is there a cap?
I'm actually not even 100% sure. They have essentially standard contracts, right?
Okay.
3-year deals.
Yep.
It's essentially like a UDFA deal.
Okay.
An undrafted free agent.
Gotcha.
It's going to work a lot like that.
So top end player makes what? In AA in
250
$250,000
over 3 years.
Yeah.
Over 3 years. Wait.
Over 3 years.
Yep.
250 over 3 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a glorified practice squad.
All right,
more,
so it's
as you say,
$80,000 a year roughly.
You can make more managing target.
Well, but guys want to play football, right?
Okay,
And guys want to play, and
It's an
guys
average
still
of
have the dream.
$75,000 a season. Now,
Sure.
I'm sure your superstars. I'm sure your guys who can actually play and they're there to be the centerpieces of the league are going to be able to be offered more. Sure,
Right.
that's just generally how it's going to work, and we don't even know about bonuses and things like that.
Yeah,
right?
Are you rooting for a salary cap, Mike? Because then you'd have to put AAF up here on SpotTrack.com.
That's right.
I'm going to put them up either way, most likely.
all
But
right.
I would actually like to see a non-cap league, just to have a variance, just to have, because I think this needs to be extremely flexible, right? If this is going to work,
Sure.
if this league specifically is going to work like they say it is, there's going to be a lot of give and take with the NFL. The XFL has already said no way. We are not a member of the NFL. We are going to be separate. We don't want our players going there, and vice versa. They want to be their own entity. I mean, you know how that's going to work. So
Sure.
Yeah, the problem, Shane, that's always been, and I'm curious on your response to this, just in general with any of these other leagues, is the NFL guys would rather have their players in their building than playing in another league, particularly when you're talking about quarterbacks, right?
Yeah, well, the most recent CBA limited some practice time, and I think, there's mixed feelings across the league on what that means, but certainly from a coach's perspective, I certainly think that they wish that they had more time, right, to develop certain players. To me, this represents kind of a way to get some guys some developmental time while still getting paid. I mean, if you're getting $70,000 your first year, and it's really over the course of 5 months or whatever, and you're developing,
right,
and then you're done in June. And if you put out good film and you get a chance to go into a training camp and hopefully make a team, I mean, you're making money year round at that point, and you're getting better as a player, ideally. So I think that's the hope of the AAF, to become kind of a feeder league, but also kind of fill that need that that fans have in the offseason for
even
football.
if you're a fringe guy and you play that league and you make $75,000 a year, and then you get a tryout and you make a practice squad. The practice squad this year is going to pay $8,000 a week. I mean, you can make almost $140,000 as a practice squad player in the NFL. So if you supplement both of those two things together, you can make a decent living for a couple of years, and then try to get your shot up. I mean, every time you go up, you're making $22,000, right, per week. So, I think it's a great way just to stay active and stay relevant, right? I mean, that's the point of this for these guys.
You're going to have teams watching your film,
All
and
the
so
time.
you got to go out and make plays at that point. And again, just show that you're improving, show that you're worthy to go into a camp. And certainly the productive players in this league, because we're talking about guys that are almost good enough for the NFL, or at one time or another have probably been on NFL rosters. I mean, this is a really good opportunity to go against your peers. It's certainly a level higher than college.
Yeah.
And if you can make plays there and show that, you're able to be productive and somebody that could potentially help an NFL team down the line, I mean, you're going to get a chance in the NFL at some point.
All right, let's get back on the superhighway that is the National Football League and this offseason. Now that we're in the offseason, there's so many intriguing things that are going to happen. Players opting out of contracts, teams opting out of contracts, tags coming through here. It's pretty complicated stuff that you have to deal with. And as an agent, you have to know it all and prepare your client for every possibility, correct?
Yeah, you do, especially for guys that are free agents. I mean, there's certainly different levels of guys in terms of, you have your players that are maybe the top at their position that are looking at setting kind of, market setting deals or surpassing, prior market setting deals. Then you have guys that are maybe middle of the road where, they're finishing up. They're maybe not a tag candidate, but you're certainly looking at different options. And I mean, you weigh so many factors, when you're trying to figure out what to do next. I mean, typically at this time of year, if you haven't re-signed, certainly you're probably going to wait till free agency and see what's out there. I mean, there's different philosophies, certainly, but I think when you're 6 weeks or so away, most players will tend to go to free agency again. But if you like the fit that you're in and the system that you're in, and the right contract comes along,
why do it? Why have we seen a half a dozen guys extend contracts in the last 2 weeks?
I'll say this. I think some players are really comfortable where they're at, and they're looking for a certain amount. And maybe if the team comes over that amount and says, hey, we really like you, or we want to structure this in a way that can set you up for continued future success down the road, not just on the field, but financially too, then it might make sense. Everybody's got a different philosophy, and again, sometimes a player's happy where he's at and likes the offer, and maybe there's been research out there of what the market's going to bear, and you feel good about it. I think as each day goes by, the guys that are unsigned, it becomes less likely to sign that extension, unless you're a tag candidate and you don't want to go through that whole process of potentially seeing if something goes to July and then an extension, or if you get tagged and then you got to play on the tag. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into that too. So it's really a case by case basis. But I think at this point, most guys are probably going to test free agency at this point.
Has it changed? Is a goal now as an agent to get your player cash up front? It just seems to me like the cash on the contract and that the guaranteed cash is what it's all about. The salary number, I don't know, it means something on the salary cap for the teams, maybe the player's ego, but isn't the real number the cash number?
That's one school of thought, certainly. It's important to do the research.
I love how he answered that, by the way. Well, that's one way to look at it, Kevin.
I think it's really important to do the research to what certain trends and what teams do and how they structure their contracts. There's certain teams that are certainly going to structure things a certain way, and there's some teams that when they sign a player and if they've got it structured a certain way, they're probably not going to want to take that cap hit. But certainly if you've got a team that is going to have some future room, maybe they're more likely to try and get out from under it, and that's maybe guaranteed money comes into play there. Or maybe you structure it in a certain way that if you have a roster bonus at a certain time, you're more comfortable as a player and as an agent to sign that contract, knowing, okay, even if they don't, even if they choose not to pick up this roster bonus, you're going to become a free agent right at the right time, and that's important. You'll see over the next couple of days certain bonuses that are due, and that's good because you can get back onto the unrestricted free agency if they don't pick it up, or if they do. Like I think Derek Carr has one today.
Yeah. We saw yesterday Spencer Long, an offensive lineman for the Jets. They declined it, which puts him on the market right now. I mean, he can be seeking sign right now. That's an advantage.
Even before
he has.
mid-March.
You become a street free agent, which is a big advantage. I mean, that's how the Bills got Chris Ivory last year, things like that. So
kind of beat the crowd.
Having those early bonuses is actually an advantage to a player who wants to be on the move. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You used the word trend, and Mike, we talk a lot with Mike about trends that he sees in the way teams are doing contracts. And Mike, I think that the one thing that we talk an awful lot about is Mike's feeling that teams are moving more towards shorter deals, front-loaded because of the cap space, because of not wanting to get tied into longer contracts. Are you seeing it as an agent, and how have you had to react to it?
Well, again, it really depends on, well, first of all, each team's different. There are some teams that have done their contracts the same way for a long time because their football administration guys have been in place and have certainly have a lot of experience and do things a certain way. There's some that get creative from year to year, and a lot about determining what their thought process is. Obviously, having communication and understanding and researching trends. Some teams now you'll see they do a lot of 46-man roster bonuses throughout the season. As kind of a way, you miss out on money obviously if you're not playing or if you're injured or whatever. But yeah,
which by the way, that's so antiquated. to me. The game day activated roster. If you got 53 guys practicing during the week, 53 guys should be able to dress.
It's everywhere.
Right? And do the teams save money by doing that?
Well, certainly if you have per week roster bonuses, certainly there is an element of money savings. I think what's interesting is when you say antiquated, I think personally, you should be able to dress everybody.
Right.
Like if you have 53 players, we're certainly at a point where everybody understands this is a game filled with injuries, and to have to determine, okay, well, there's only so many players that we can bring onto the field, and
I guess let me narrow my question down. Sure. If I'm backup lineman, right? I'm the third guard on the team, and man, I've been inactive the first 4 games, and then I get activated week 5. Do I get paid more? Like, did I make less money by not being active? Or does it just depend on the individual contract?
It'll depend. For the most part, that scenario for that type of player, that's really not going to come to effect. You'll see some free agencies.
Well, Sam Bradford's the poster boy for this.
Yes,
the Cardinals saved millions deactivating him off the 46-man roster.
Well, he had a bad agent then.
No, he had a bad knee.
He's made a lot of money.
He had a bad knee.
Sam Bradford is. I'll tell you this. Sam Bradford has. He came in the league at the right time when he was.
Him and Stafford cashed in.
They've made a ton of money, and Sam Bradford every year somebody pays him a lot of money. So
this has got to be the breaking year, right?
No one's going to pay him this
right.
year.
You never know.
But that is the example right there of a leverage between the 46-man and the 53 when you've got a big contract like that. But I would imagine the smaller contracts, you stay away from that.
Yeah, you'll see, and again, those types of, and some teams really don't even use them or stay away from them, or you can negotiate away from them. Yeah. But some teams, like I think the 49ers, tend to use those types of
because Garoppolo lost money because of the injury, right?
I believe so. Without having that contract in front of me, but certainly if it was structured that way.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. He did.
I remember us talking about that. So I was just curious because most of the contracts in the NFL, we're talking about 53-man rosters, and then you have practice squads. We talk often about the big contracts. We'll talk about Nick Foles, but what's that, 2% of the league, 5% maybe, are these big deals that we talk about, sure. the Khalil Mack deals, that the sexy deals, but then we've got I think Edelman's deal was eye-raising for everybody,
pretty
right?
Unbelievable, right?
Yeah, this guy, people are talking about being a Hall of Famer, and you're like, I made $3 million, or he's going to make $3 million, like. Really?
He would have if he didn't get popped for PEDs.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's a whole other story when it comes to that. So, those are the more common contracts that you deal with, right?
Yeah, there's a ton of guys that are, you might call them mid-level free agents, certainly maybe not top of the market setting deals. And those ones can get really interesting because, not only at that point are you trying to figure out the best money situation, but also the best playing fit too. And, do you think, and you have these conversations with the player, do you think you can take a shorter term deal, kind of, they call it like a prove it deal, in the right system and the right fit, and then hopefully reset your value? Or can you get a little bit more guarantees? You kind of understand where the player fits in the league. Maybe if he's like a really good special teams player or like a guy that's going to be, more of depth for you. He's been in the league for a while. There's a ton of consideration to come into these decisions, and really kind of knowing not only where your client fits in the league, but kind of having conversations, understanding his value, his positional value, no matter how many stats he has, I think is really important. And you'll continue to see that over the next 2 months. Maybe some guys that aren't signing right away, but kind of sign. Teams will kind of call them value type signings. That maybe aren't commanding the high salaries that make the headlines, but nonetheless, a team thinks, hey, he can come in and help us, and we're getting him at a good price. So there's a lot of those types of guys, and it's really interesting.
To kind of stay structurally here, do you have any sense that teams are starting to shy away from workout bonuses? It's one of those questions I get every single year from a ton of Twitter followers and things like that. That there's always those couple of days when those things start to come, get paid, and you've got guys making $500,000 just to show up, and it's.
Is it really because they want them to show up, or is it just a tool of the contract?
It's cash. It's basically just part of the salary, but it's given at a certain point in time. And yes, most of them have de-escalators built in. If you don't show up, you lose that bonus. So it can be to the team's advantage at some degree, but I mean, do you have teams that frown upon those when you do your work? I just wonder how those get built in. To some degrees, they're huge.
Yeah, I think they've been maybe a little less prominent over the last couple of years. But to Paul's question, I mean, sometimes it really is a function of, hey, we want this guy in the facility, we want him to be here.
Yeah,
or they're worried he won't be there.
Well, what's interesting. Sometimes a big money free agent might get it, and the team might do it just for the sense of, hey, we signed this guy, and look, he's in the facility every day working and
image
and trying to get better. Sometimes
Odell Beckham Jr. by the way has a gigantic one.
And it does look good, right? I mean, if you're a franchise and you spend a lot of money on a guy and you want to get the fans excited and the first day of off-season program, that player's there and working hard. I mean, it looks good. And I mean, as an agent, obviously, that's easy money for a player. You got to remind him to be there.
It's like the one thing players have leverage over right now. Yeah,
and it's look, you go and you start working hard and trying to fit not just the system, but it shows that you're a part of the franchise, you're part of the culture of the team. So a lot of considerations there, but that is an interesting, and it'll be interesting to see where that goes and where it continues to go.
Yeah.
Well, some of it might be cash management too, right? If you've got a client that can't make it fast enough the way he spends money, which I know you guys advise them not to, but I'm just saying somebody burns through cash, it might be, okay, we'll get you some paychecks in the spring, but you got to get your butt, I
love the weight clauses. Those are the best.
Yeah.
Where the workout bonus is kind of strung over the course of the season, and you got to weigh in every 6 weeks.
Guys wearing those rubber suits the wrestlers wore in high school, right? Walk around spitting in a cup just to make weight when it comes to that.
If there's one position that we spend a lot of time talking with Mike about, Mike, you know what I'm talking about here, right? Tell everybody what position.
Kicker?
Kicker.
I would be remiss if it isn't the quarterback.
Well, honestly, that wasn't what I was thinking.
Or the running back in the other direction.
Running back is really where I was thinking.
One of the extremes.
And we talk about trends, and you've brought this up. We spend a lot of time with Mike talking about how it's become, if you want to use the word devalued, or it's become glutton. There's a glut of them. There's so many of them that few of them are getting paid. How many running backs do you have as clients? And give us an agent's perspective on what you think has happened to that position.
It's really over the last, if you want to say 5 to 10 years, the position has morphed, certainly. Growing up watching football, the best players in the NFL other than quarterbacks were running backs, right? Emmitt Smith and Thurman Thomas, those were guys that I grew up watching. And Thurman Thomas was the MVP of the league, 1990, 91, right? And so you often don't see that. You hear all the time it's a quarterback-driven league. But it's really been interesting, and I think the importance of the position has really been reflected not just in some of the deals that have been signed, but some of the battles too, right? Le'Veon Bell's situation has been one of the more unique situations in the past couple of years from a contract standpoint. But you have seen some players sign lucrative deals. Todd Gurley certainly is one of them. And there's been guys that have been able to cash in. But it is tough if you're, maybe that role-playing running back or a guy that's splitting carries. It's easy for a team, there's a lot of multiple running back sets or guys that split carries. And so you might not have the stats. And so when you're doing player comparisons, it's really important to not only understand that, but really have your expectations with your client aligned with where the league's going with paying those types of players. But also selling to a team, look, just because he's a role player doesn't mean he should necessarily be paid less. And so there's a lot of discussions around that. But it's certainly an interesting position. One guy represented, Fred Jackson, he was in a position all the time. His stats are amazing for the Bills when you consider that every year he was sharing carries with whether it was Marshawn Lynch or C.J. Spiller, throughout his career, right? There were certainly always guys there that were sharing carries, and he still is, I think third in Bills history in rushing, which is pretty cool considering everybody that was around him. And so, you've kind of seen the league kind of morph into running back by committee and guys that can do different things. But you're also seeing now too running backs that can catch the ball out of the backfield are going to have more value because certainly they're involved more.
Oh, so you mentioned Todd Gurley. So his contract to me is a contract of caution to NFL GMs, and the fact they're bringing Anderson, and he played a bigger role in getting that team to the Super Bowl than Gurley. And Gurley can say all he wants about his knee not being injured. hogwash. The guy's hurt. Or, right? I mean, or they would have used him, right?
There's no logical reason why they didn't use him more if he wasn't hurt.
Correct.
Aren't we at a point now where I'm not paying one running back $15, I'm paying 2.8?
And I look at,
right?
I look at
Isn't that where we're going here?
I look at the team that won the Super Bowl, and I've got an issue with them, by the way. I was telling Mike about this before the game. It involved a square and a damn kick.
Oh, will you stop already?
Oh, no.
You're the only one, by the way, Kevin, who had that happen.
I wasn't, not because of Greg the Leg. That one, those people, boy, at the end of the game, were thinking, okay, great, my box is coming in. Mm-hmm. And he hooks it big time.
Or the people that had it through the whole quarter and might have seen it slipping away.
Well, it didn't slip away because he missed the damn kick. But anyway, that's I had to get that off my chest since we talk about money in sports. But you look at the Patriots and what they do with White, Michelle, Burkhead, right?
Yep.
I'm Le'Veon Bell, I'm sorry, buddy, but teams don't need to pay him that kind of money, which not good for that business. Or maybe it's better for you, Shane, that you have running backs that you can get more. There's more running backs you can get work for.
Let me actually expand on that, though. Yeah. You've also then got this really big growing salary cap. I mean, it's not going up $1 million; it's going up $10 million,
right,
every year, right? So you've got a guy like Le'Veon Bell saying, "Well, I'm still worth $15 million a year." Right?
Is he?
And all of these teams can afford me. I've got 12 teams with $45 million in cap space right now, right? So I don't know.
Is he worth it? I'd say yes, but
he was.
No, I'm going to say this. Is Gurley worth it? Yes. Is Bell worth it? Yes.
Oh, you'd find a lot of people saying Gurley's not worth 14.
No, but here's what I'm going to say. Is it worth it to the team to pay one player
from a business standpoint?
From a business standpoint, and that's, if I were a GM, I'd argue that with the agent, and the agent's job is, well, no, hang on, look at this guy's production.
Yes.
He is worth that kind of money. That's what the exchange is about, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly Todd Gurley's not my client, but that was an excellent contract from an agent standpoint. I think a lot of people viewed it as a market-setting type deal. And, I mean, look, certainly the focus has been, when the playoffs, he maybe didn't have as much of an impact, whether it was injury, I have no idea. But, I mean, that was a great contract. He helped them throughout the year.
He 21 touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean, he was insane.
Well, I'm not saying really he's not worth it. He's worth the money, but to the team, can you spend that money on three different players?
So it's not going to be fair to compare him with Le'Veon Bell because Bell's 30.
Right.
Or getting there, right? So,
well, actually, he's 29 because he took a year off.
Yeah.
Age is just a number, Mike.
Sorry. Anyway, what I'm talking about is you got a guy like Zeke Elliott who's probably going to get paid this offseason. That's the barometer. That's the Gurley comparison here. And if the Cowboys, are going to be the Cowboys, they're going to pay him $16 million. That's just what's going to happen.
The interesting thing is all it takes is one team, right, to pay it, and that helps set the market. And that's what you can say not only to your client but teams too. Is like, look, somebody's going to pay it if you've done your homework and research into the value and you feel confident about it. And that's really that's how you get paid, right? Is having somebody being willing to extend that offer.
I do think the Patriots point can't go unnoticed though. Because it is once again how they won the Super Bowl.
Right.
That they had Rex Burkhead and James Nevlin and these guys that barely got a use throughout the year in prominent positions in the Super Bowl, rushing and catching.
They've won 6 Super Bowls without cheating. Name the running backs. Name the starting running backs on those Super Bowl teams. Antoine Smith.
Yeah. Corey Dillon.
LeGarrette Blount, right?
LeGarrette Blount, James White obviously has played roles. Guys like Vereen, it's never one guy. Whoever gets the first snap is irrelevant in the world of the Patriots. It's been Kevin Falk. Yeah. It's been all of those guys.
Yeah.
It's been all those guys. And there's the other thing that we talk a lot about, Shane, with Mike is because and mostly running back because it tends to be a churn it out, get the most out of them, and go to the next one position. But are we getting closer to a point in football beyond the running back, and there's always going to be the exceptions to the great players, where it's one contract, get the most out of a pair of young, fresh legs, and then move on to the next guy. And as an agent, you're always gearing to that second contract, because that's when most guys really get paid. Are we moving away from that, and how does that change the agent model?
Yeah, you've seen running backs certainly. You can look at the stats. I mean, their shelf life, just from a playing career perspective, isn't. They don't have the longevity that other positions have. I think there's been certainly a lot of talk. I mean, Saquon Barkley, it was great for him to be the number 2 overall pick because he got a lot of guaranteed money, and the Giants in turn really hold his rights for a long time. Not only do they have the 5th-year option that they'll pick up, but I'm sure he'll continue to be the excellent player that he is. They'll have opportunities to tag him, and certainly you kind of have certain situations that play out over and over again. Now, who knows what the CBA will look like in 5 or 6 years, which will be really interesting. But yeah, I mean that's certainly a factor. I mean, look, if you're Phillip Lindsay, I mean. Yeah. This time next year, he can enter into contract negotiations. I tell players this all the time. The draft's really important. Obviously, I mean, the higher you go, the more money you get. But it's not the end-all, be-all, right? I tell players the draft's really important, but it's about September 1st, particularly for your late round and undrafted free agents. If you're a running back and you go undrafted and you make a roster and you can make an impact like a Phillip Lindsay did, you can get paid sooner, which is great.
But is there a fear that a Phillip Lindsay will never get paid?
He's a great player, so he'll get paid. And those types of guys will, somebody's going to pay him. Again, all it takes is one team. I think he's, there was talk of him getting some potentially some votes, in the offensive rookie of the year. I mean, he was a great player for them, and I think, look, if you can find a way to fit the system. And make plays, and especially on special teams. And New England's a great example of this. You can find a role in the league someplace. And so it's about being adaptable. I mean, if you just are good at one thing and you're easily replaceable, sure, it's probably tougher to get a bigger money deal down the road. Certainly, again, the league's kind of moved away from, one running back per team getting a ton of money. Some teams still do it, obviously, depending on the player and the situation. But, yeah, New England's a really good example. I think they draft guys. They drafted Sony Michel. They're going to continue to use him. And, when the time comes, depending what happens with the other guys, they'll draft another one, and the train will keep moving. And so they're really good at doing that. And, as an agent, you tell your players all the time, look, if you can make plays, if you can fit the system, if you can be a good special teams player, particularly for your back end roster type players. I mean, somebody's going to pay you, and somebody's going to pay you well.
You're talking Lindsay, you're talking the Broncos here. I think it's a really good kind of a lead into this. You've mentioned a lot that your big jobs obviously is to find a good fit, a good system fit. How hard has that been recently when you've got 6-7 coaches being fired every single year, when offensive structures are changing every single year? I mean, we say this, it's a passing league.
Shoot, offensive structures changed from early in the season when we thought offenses were blowing up to the last playoffs of the Super Bowl where it was all about defense.
Right. Is it impossible at this point? The Broncos this year are not going to be the Broncos next year. Who knows how Phillip Lindsay's going to fit in? It might not even be Case Keenum's
Or who knows if the new coach wants a different kind of style running back.
That's what I mean. It's got to be getting harder and harder with the way things have shifted so much.
You know where it's really interesting is when you represent players in the draft and it's getting towards the end of the draft, and if they do go undrafted, that's when it's really important to do your homework on those types of players where they could potentially fit. Obviously people think of free agency. They think of, in the middle of March, your big money guys. But, I mean, the way we look at it is free agency is anytime a player can sign with any team. And so right after the draft is when undrafted free agency hits. And it's so important for all your clients to not only review the various depth charts and understand the roster composition of each team, also understand what type of contracts at that position each team has. Who are they likely to cut? Who are they not likely to cut? You want to look for any edge, right, when you're trying to sign with a team after the draft. Where is he more likely to fit? You do research into what percentage of players for each organization makes the 53-man roster if they go undrafted. How many snaps are they getting in the preseason? There's really a lot to go into it because you want to give any of those guys any edge. And so I guess where I'm going with this is certainly a system fit is a huge thing for an undrafted free agent. If you've got a brand new coaching staff, I mean, certainly you want to look into what that offensive or defensive coordinator has run in the past, and are they more adept at using the undrafted free agents or role playing guys? And just as important again is special teams. what special teams systems are they using a lot of, running backs or wide receivers, who are they enabling to make plays? I mean, a good example is, we represent Marcus Kemp with the Chiefs. He was getting Pro Bowl votes as a special teamer, and I don't, he really didn't get a ton of snaps at wide receiver, but I mean, he was an excellent special teams player for them. And so he was an undrafted free agent. And so it's important, when you're going through that process to understand, okay, not just offensive and defensive system fits, but special teams too, because that's how you got to make a roster if you're that type of
So
player.
is a GM change more impactful to you?
It can be, right? Because again, it's what front office is most likely to give not just opportunities to undrafted free agents, but will keep one over a guy that's a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick. If you're an established, like the Steelers or the Patriots, with that's got a front office that that's okay with cutting a draft pick to keep an undrafted free agent, really the best player. You definitely want to look into that and consider it. There's stats, and we have them lined up. What teams keep their percentage of 6th and 7th round picks, on average, and which teams will have undrafted free agents. So it really is an interesting process.
This is probably a terrible question for you to answer as an agent, but would you rather have a guy picked in the 6th or 7th round or become a UDFA?
Ooh. That's a good question.
If you had a crystal ball and knew that he was going to be a great player, you'd rather have him be an undrafted free agent. A great example, I think it was Alan Hearns with the Jaguars, right? He went undrafted, and he signed a huge money deal after his second year. And it was a great contract. And he was making more at that point than just about anybody outside of the first round or whatever the numbers are. Mm-hmm. So, again, if you know the player is going to be really, really good, then I'd certainly tell you, hey, you get to renegotiate your contract
because you're not locked into that rookie deal.
Correct. Or so under the CBA,
the rookie drafted deal is what I wanted to say.
Yeah, so it's a 3-year deal, and you can renegotiate after 2. All draft picks outside of the first round, they're 4-year deals. But you can renegotiate after 3. So you're able to renegotiate a year sooner. So if you're going to be this impactful player, and again, if you have that crystal ball, you say, hey, you're probably better off being an undrafted free agent. And the other consideration too is, and you'll see it sometimes, teams will take developmental type guys in the 7th round, and they're stacked at that certain position. You'll see, some analysts might, say, well, they have a lot of receivers. Not sure why they took one in the 7th round. I mean, that's a tough one because at that point you're fighting for a practice squad spot. Realistically, if you're that 7th round pick on a stacked team, now vice versa. I mean, that can happen where you go to a great fit in the 6th or 7th round too. But if you're an undrafted free agent, you get to pick where you go, and all that research that I was just talking about is a huge factor. I mean, you can figure out what the best system fit is, figure out who gives their undrafted free agents the most amount of playing time, and they're most likely to make the team. I mean, you're trying to find any edge that you can as an agent to help a player pick the right spot so he can make that 53-man roster.
Tied into this because I think a lot of what you're talking about, Shane, is part of the process that you use when you are recruiting potential clients. I'm super intrigued about this, so I want to ask you this question. You said you have 20 players right now that are coming out of college, getting ready for the draft. What's the process like in getting those 20 guys to agree to work with you? When does that start? There's the Hollywood stylized version of how it's done, in the shadows sometimes, and with things being thrown at all these players. But give us the reality of the recruiting process, because you got to do it every year. You've got to fill your client base.
Yeah, it's a process that starts pretty early. Different agencies have different philosophies of when they'll start recruiting guys. I think the overall viewpoint that I take from it is we want to find NFL players and guys that are going to go into the league and have a chance to make rosters. It's a commission-based business, so obviously their success is our success, right? So it really starts early on. You want to identify players with NFL talent, and you do that a couple of ways. for myself, I mean, you want to build good relationships with teams, with scouts throughout the league, be able to get good feedback on not just who they're looking at, but who they think, if you bring a player up to them, who has a chance to make a roster. For myself, I have a football background. I worked for the Bills in player personnel. So if I can get film on somebody, I'll try and get a determination or a handle. Okay, I think maybe he has the traits and make it. It's certainly a height, weight, speed league. So if you can get a good listing of players' official heights, weights, and if they have a 40 time from their junior day, that really helps. And if they don't, their estimated is pretty good, because you can start to narrow it down from there. And that helps you too when you're recruiting a player, saying, hey, if you're an offensive tackle and you're 6'6" and 315 pounds and you're an athletic guy, I mean, somebody's going to bring you into a training camp and work with you because you have the tools. But it goes beyond that too, right? I mean, when you're trying to identify players, and again, it's similar to how teams do it. We want to work with the right guys. I mean, there's certain players, college players, that may have different issues in their background, arrests or whatever.
Transgressions, sure.
Yeah. And those can be tough. Now, look, we all make mistakes, so it's important to vet those issues just like teams do. Those guys need agents too, and they need someone to work for them and fight for them too. So you want to get an understanding and say, hey, was he a good guy in the locker room? Was he a good guy to his teammates? Did the coaches like him? I mean, there's so many factors when you're trying to figure out who to go after. And then in terms of the recruiting process, you just you sit down with them. You can talk to them. That's not prohibited by NCAA rules.
Anytime during their senior season or whatever, there's football, their college season, you can talk to them.
You can talk to them at any time. It's just you can't give them a benefit,
right?
So talking to them, their parents, that's certainly.
You can buy them lunch.
You cannot buy them
Nope.
lunch.
That's
nope.
stupid.
Nope.
Can't bake them cookies. I can tell you that story.
Nope.
My past as well too. So.
Can't buy them a bottle of water. In some states, that's a felony. So.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow.
State of North Carolina, if you sat down with a player and bought him a bottle of water, that would be a felony before his eligibility's up.
Wow.
Yeah. Yep.
That's
Some states it's a misdemeanor. Some
Right.
states don't have those laws on the book, but yeah. And as an agent, you really got to be cognizant of what the rules are, what
Sure.
different state rules are. Some programs will have an agent registration process that you need to go through. You talk to compliance. You give them your background, show them that you're certified. By the union. Everybody's a little different. Some programs are really open about it, and they want to talk to agents and help them, help players make a good, decision. It's really a case by case basis. But yeah, it's that part of it's really interesting too. Is just knowing the various regulations that go into it and all that stuff.
all right. What about so the best chance of getting clients is out of college, correct? I imagine players don't change agents that much unless the agent did a bad contract for him, right?
Right.
So that's the best way to do it. So I unless you guys have other things on this, I want to move on to actual. Okay, it's time to negotiate contracts. How much negotiation is done via text, or is it all over the phone? Skype, whatever. I'm just curious how the negotiations.
You're talking
go.
about negotiating with teams, Kevin?
With teams,
right.
like,
because you've
so-
already inked the player. You've got the player under your control.
You've got the player. They want the player. All right, it's time to talk nitty gritty, Shane. And obviously, you want them to call you first. You don't want to make the first call.
Well, I've been on the agent side of this business for 5 years, and even I've noticed a trend over the last couple of years. You do more and more by text and stuff like that. Right? It used to be like trading email proposals and stuff like that. And there's certainly still a lot of that,
Sure.
And phone calls and stuff. But sometimes, I've even negotiated certain things, whether it's whether it's a smaller deal or an injury settlement over text.
That's no fun, right? That's not fun.
It's
can't be
efficient.
fun.
It's efficient, which
Not like
good.
not like the old days when one of the legendary stories in where we are in
Facts.
Western New York and Buffalo was Bill Polian and Jim Kelly's agent, like Bill Polian challenging him to line up as an offensive lineman, and they were going to go at it in a blocking drill in Polian's office, right? You missed that via text.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like the negotiations,
I don't know. Maybe Shane doesn't miss that.
Shane, what I want to hear is
I don't think I'd win that battle.
Yeah.
So.
Everybody wants to see the story where a general manager told you to go, fly a kite, to put it politely, and then an hour later, okay, let's do this, right?
Yeah, no, listen, that happens. I've had it happen before too, particularly in injury settlement discussions. Those tend to be the most contentious. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's probably like a different podcast for a different day. Yeah, and saying, oh, the team's going to say, yeah, well, he's not going to be out that long. And you're like, what are you talking about? He's got to have surgery. You know what I mean? So those get really contentious, and a lot of those are done sometimes, if it's an easy one or one that you have a consensus opinion on the value of the deal, then those are a little bit easier. But there's still definitely deals done over phone, and they can get contentious. But at the end of the day, I think you got to keep in mind as an agent, you're going to be dealing with the same 32 teams, the same 32 people. You keep it civil, but you got to stand strong for your client. Some teams will do a good job of trying to apply pressure and I don't want to call them scare tactics, but
sure.
Look, you understand this is a business. They know they have to work with the same agents too. I can only speak for myself and our agency, but we have a great relationship with most, if not all, the teams. It's a business relationship. You have to deal with them. Not just throughout the year, but in future years. So you'll have contentious moments, but I think, at the end of the day, you understand that you'll be working together again. And as long as you're fair, I think the minute you can start to get in trouble and hurt your reputation on the league is when you do some shady or underhanded stuff. But if you're tough but fair, at the end of the day, you're doing the best for your client, you're going to be just fine. You might piss off a team or two by standing, taking a strong stance, but that's what you do as an agent, and you fight for your client and everything that they deserve. So,
all right, how about as we kind of wrap this up here with Shane, we throw a couple of I want to throw a couple of questions at you, moments maybe that you can relate from your career. No names are necessary on any side here.
Thank you so much.
Well, he's got to keep this job.
Yes.
So my first one to you, and maybe these guys will get the sense of what we're doing here, is most unusual request you've ever gotten from a client, player client.
Oh man!
Like, I need this, I want this, you got to get this for me.
I've had before, if you have a player maybe that's fighting to get a roster, in training camp, and they're in camp and they're working hard. I've had before, like a player call up and ask about like a free T-shirt deal. And it's like July 31st, it's like final cuts for 3 weeks, and you're like, you make that roster, I'll give you all the T-shirts you want.
If they make the roster, don't they get as many free T-shirts they want from the team, right?
That's been a point that I've raised. So.
I can't even even back when I was on the beat in the NFL, like locker cleanout day, the guys just throw the stuff away. They get so much stuff, it's stupid.
But it hasn't always been that case. I mean, back in the day, guys used to have to pay for stuff, so it's not always been that way.
Starter jackets.
I remember stories of some of the chintzier teams that would give receivers like one pair of gloves, and if they wanted a new one, they had to go. That would be put on there. It would be taken off their paycheck, and that may still exist to some degree in the NFL. I don't know. Now that all the stuff with Nike is pretty much a free deal. All right, you guys must have something for Shane here about his career. Some cool question.
Toughest contract that you had to negotiate, meaning the back and forth. And I'm not saying who was the biggest jerk. I'm just saying, like, man, is this thing ever going to get done? This is a really hard negotiation, but you held your ground, they held their ground, and in the end, you guys came to a common ground. If you care to share who that is.
Sure. So, without naming team or player, this was a situation we encountered where there was a pre-existing injury. And so there was a lot of back and forth and doctor's visits related to the injury and what specifically they call injury waiver language would be in the contract. And where this comes up is if a player has a certain injured condition, right, and they go out, and if there's none of this language, if they get hurt playing football, team's on the hook for that for the contract, and they go on IR and whatnot. However, where this comes up and where it can be contentious is if there's some type of past medical issue. And the team says, "Hey, if you hurt your knee, it is due to this pre-existing condition, and we are not responsible for, salary, money, whatever, right?" And this gets contentious, right? So maybe there is some type of pre-existing condition, and if the player, and if you're just trying to get him on the right team and the right fit, and it's all about leverage too, right? And how many other teams are interested. But if you're trying to get him in the right situation, this happens a lot with undrafted free agents. What you have to consider is how is that language tailored, right? Is this, if he hurts his left knee, you're out of luck. But what if it's really just like a meniscus problem or an MCL, but he tears his ACL, right? So you need to make sure that language is so narrow, if every team insists on it, that, you're okay if he hurts a different part of his knee, right?
Amazing, isn't it?
So where this comes up, and I've had a couple of these. Some teams are really good, and if they really want the guy, they'll tailor it narrowly, right? But sometimes, they'll. I don't want to say they're trying to catch you asleep at the wheel, but they'll have an injury language paragraph, and you're reading it, and you're like, okay, so you're saying if he hurts his knee, that might be related to the hip problem that he had, and then we don't pay him. You know what I mean? And then you got to go back and forth, and we've had scenarios where there's a lot over just a few sentences where commas are, where words, specific parts, we're trying, and I'm not a doctor, but you better have a pretty good, medical team or whoever you rely on for this stuff to work with you. And because they've got all the resources on their side, they've got some of the best doctors in the world. And so in this situation with the negotiation there was a couple teams involved, was understanding what language the different teams would be comfortable putting in, just in case, again, the player was to get hurt. And not only that, but again, talking to players, talking to teams' medical staffs, hey, what type of language would you require in this? And it might be tough for them to say. You might actually have to fly them to that facility and have them do a physical. And so this particular player went through, I think, 3 different physicals with 3 different teams. And it was all about, again, finding that right type of language. But also, and all these teams, by the way, were great fits for the player, too. They were all about equal on where we thought would have a chance to make the roster and system fit and all that. So, yeah, it really did come down to negotiating the best injury settlement language in case, or injury waiver language in case he was injured, and making sure, look, football's an dangerous game. Guys get hurt all the time. We didn't want a situation where he got hurt because in the normal course of play, and the team would try and wash their hands of him. So yeah, that was certainly one of the more interesting negotiations, and you'll find that too. I mean, if you've got a top player, sometimes those negotiations are a little bit easier than one might think. I mean, you do a lot of research into it, but in terms of the actual back and forth, if you can settle on some good numbers that work for both sides, even though there was a lot of back-end work and a lot of back-end research, sometimes those are easier. Of course, sometimes those are really, really difficult too. So it really just depends on the situation.
Fascinating stuff. There's probably so much more we could cover, but we've been almost an hour deep into this with Shane Costa from Pillar Sports Management. We'll have to do this again, Shane. Will you come back?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that'd be awesome.
All right, and Paul will have Shane.
Right around draft time, I think would be really interesting. To look back at free agency and tell us how he's getting his guys ready be prepared for the draft.
I also think we should hire him to negotiate our contract with Mike for this show. Sure, yeah.
No.
All right. I think we just found our next negotiation for Shane's going to be a tough one between Shane and Mike. It's going to be great. All right. Well, we thank you for listening to the SpotTrack.com podcast. For Mike Giannetti and Paul Peck, I'm Kevin Sylvester. We'll talk to you next time.